when I was a kid. I just remember going to like a doctor's kid's house, and it's just like, wait, he has an electric can opener? And I tell my mom about that now, and she thought that was hysterical, that I thought that was a measure of wealth. She's like, we had one at some point.
Dude, even I had an electric can opener.
I do not remember having one.
Two lifelong friends document and share their personal stories as they seek financial independence and to retire early. One reaches FIRE in 2020 during a global pandemic, inspiring the other to play catch up. This is Two Sides of FI. So we've known each other 35 years. So you and I met in 8th grade, best of friends throughout high school. But like everybody, we kind of went our separate ways after we graduated high school. We kept in touch. You were the best man in my wedding. I was the best man in your wedding. And now we're kind of living on opposite coasts. So I live in Maine. You live in California. I mean, it's hard to get further apart, man.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you're set up out there.
So I live in the central coast of California, about halfway between LA and San Francisco. Moved down here from the Bay Area just 7 months ago. I am married. I've been with my wife for almost 20 years now and have a 15-year-old daughter, and was trained as a scientist, spent most of my career in biotech at a number of different companies, half of that in science and R&D, and the other half in various commercial roles. And I left the workplace just 7 months ago, and now I'm sitting here today making this show with you.
In 2020, you left, right?
It was the first week of June 2020.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha. Well, I'm not quite too FIRE yet. As I said, we live on opposite coasts. I live in Maine with my family. So I have two teenage boys, 14 and 16. They're kind of finishing up with high school. I'm married, I have a wife of 20 years. We've lived in Maine for about 20 years. And I've had my own business. I'm an architect, sole practitioner since 2013. So I've been doing this close to 8 years out on my own. Prior to that, practiced for a number of different architecture firms, big and small, residential, commercial, all of that. Really love designing homes. And I also, as part of starting my own business, kind of started this, I guess it started as a side hustle, and it kind of turned into maybe kind of the main thing, my own YouTube channel. That's kind of a business of its own at this point. And I'm a few years out, I think, from FIRE. I'm kind of tracking the kids graduating high school, kind of using that as an endpoint, but it's a little bit in flux, and I know we're going to get to talking about that. If you think about your parents raised you, right? And they were raised by their parents. And so really the operating system that's installed in your parents is one of their parents, because it's just passing on all these ideas, and if I think about where my grandparents were, I mean, this was like, they grew up in the Depression. It's like a time of scarcity, right? And you and I know, because we're friends, shared kind of similar financial histories, just in terms of where our parents came from. Tell me about like how you think that impacted your financial psychology. How did it affect you?
My parents got married young. They had kids young, as you did, and neither of them went to college. They worked really hard as a result. Did a lot of great stuff, but worked a lot of hours. And they always made sure we were provided for, but we were not living a lavish lifestyle. I'm sure that informed my thoughts about money. I occasionally would see glimpses of the lives of people who were much better off. When I was a kid, I just remember going to like a doctor's kid's house, and it's just like, wait, he has an electric can opener? What the heck is that? And I tell my mom about that now, and she thought that was hysterical, that I thought that was a measure of wealth. She's like, we had one at some point. Of course, I didn't remember that. Maybe it was when I was really, really small.
Dude, even I had an electric can opener.
I do not remember having one, but I definitely always thought about money and saving. And maybe it's a direct outgrowth of that. I have no idea. But as soon as I had a job, I think I had a savings account before I had a job.
Yeah. Were your parents saving though? Because my mother took me, she worked at a bank for a period of time, and she's like marched me over there with my lawn mowing money, and, we deposit it in the account and everything. But I never thought of my parents as savers. Were your parents?
No, I never did either. And I suspect it was, and I'm guessing here, I think it was probably outside of their means for some time.
Yeah.
My dad worked in an industry where he was a part of a union, and as a result, they had pretty good benefits over time. And so I know eventually he did, and my mother did as well, contribute to, 401k at some point, but it was later in life.
Yeah.
And it wasn't to the degree that is sort of, the guidance that people have these days about how much to save and what ways to invest it. So yeah, they saved, but no, as a kid, I didn't think of it as sort of maybe something that was even possible to save a lot.
My parents were very similar. They got married really young. My mother never went to college. It wasn't really an option for her. My dad went to school. He was an educator, but I mean, he was making peanuts, really, really very little money. They had 2 kids when they were fairly young. I never felt like we were poor necessarily, but man, we weren't living very high on the hog. But my parents gave everything they had to me and my sister. I have one sibling. We both went to college, but that wasn't even an option for my mother. And my parents were working multiple jobs at times. My father would come home from working his professional job during the day, and he'd go to work in a liquor store at night, until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And my mother would wait tables, and she had multiple jobs. And I didn't see a lot of that with my closer friends. I mean, it may be one of the reasons why you and I connected so well, because I felt like you and I were kind of on a level playing field. Whereas I would go over to some of our friends' houses, speaking to the electric can opener story, like they have the nice computer or they have the Atari or whatever.
I know.
Ooh, and I didn't want to have them to my house because I didn't have any of that stuff. I just had like, hey, get on your bike and go ride around town. That's what I had. I remember my father buying, like, it was an Apple II GS or not a great computer, right? And he used one of the store credit cards to do that. And he paid for that computer for like 8 years. I swear to you, it was one of those high interest credit cards, and he couldn't have afforded it, but he wanted my sister and I to have the computer that all of our friends had. Those financial stories, they have a lot of weight. I mean,
they do.
I always remember my father just being stressed out about money, and yet they made college happen. And it's not like I went to a cheap school. I didn't go.
You and me both.
I mean, there's no way they could have afforded that. We shared in the cost, but that was completely beyond their means. And it was the springboard to everything in my future. And I don't want to disparage them.
I'm not taking it that way at all.
For that financial narrative that they instilled in me, but it just carries on. When I got my first job, I was spending. I wasn't like saving first and spending what's left over. I was spending first, and if there was anything left over, I might have saved it. But it sounds like you were a natural saver.
Yeah, I was. And I went to college actually with a decent amount of savings from all the summer jobs and jobs I had during the school year. Yeah. Now, I'll freely admit I spent a lot of my money on beer
I was gonna say.
And gas to drive my car. But and I bought a couple of largely not very good used cars myself.
You had some memorable cars, man. The T-Bird.
I really did, man. Oh, the T-Bird was amazing. I always felt like I wanted to work because I wanted to have money to spend. And, I wasn't asking for, nor would there probably been an awesome response from my parents to asking for handouts. Yeah. So, like you, I worked. And unlike a lot of our friends, I was working during school in the evenings because, you could work 3 to 6 or something, 3:30 to 6:30 once you were 16. Yeah. And I did that. I mean, we were expected to, I'm sure you were too, pay for my insurance from my car because, that was going to be a big increase for my folks. And I needed spending money. And I also knew I wanted to go to college with money. So I did save. And when I was in my first job, there was a 401k. And so I did contribute. Honestly, I didn't know anything about that until that first job. And luckily, they had somebody doing a great sell job to explain to, one of those all associate meetings why this was valuable. I immediately latched on to the company match idea. And while I couldn't go up to the match in my first job because I was very poorly paid, and despite having a master's degree, it's just how it was. I was the lowest paid of all my friends graduating from RPI, which is where I went to university. In 1997 dollars, it was $27,000 a year.
More than me, man. I made 24.
I've done the scale. Yeah, I've done the scale. Well, that's actually such an awesome negotiation story. So my very first work negotiation happened when I got the job offer over the phone. The guy was like, congratulations, we want to offer you this job. The salary would be $26,000 a year. And I must have read something somewhere because I was like, that's not good enough. He's like, how about 27? And I was just like, sold. I got a $1,000 raise.
Wow, he was really marching it up, huh?
I didn't know how to handle it.
He wanted you bad.
Boy, thankfully, I figured that out later on.
Yeah, well, my negotiation didn't go very well in that job. I said 24. Any room to move on that? They said nope. Nope. You want a job or no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got better at it over time, thankfully.
Yeah, no, I definitely am curious to hear about those tactics too, because I was never really that good at it.
It's so funny that you brought up the computer. Like, my parents saw my interest in technology and computers very early. And, I ended up getting a computer pretty early in life. And man, my family had to like chip in for that thing. And it was like a big deal. And it paid off, right? It was a huge part of who I am today, totally. Even at the hobby level, right? I've never been a software developer as a career for sure, but man, that was big. But other kids' computers, that is such a funny topic because, where we lived was quite a mix of people, right? Yeah. Central New York, completely rural, like people who are just very poor, to we have this, big hospital for the county seat in our town. And so we had a lot of, doctors' kids in our class, some of whom we were and still are really good friends with. I mean, awesome people, but things were different, right? You go to their house. I could think of one time where I was basically getting called out for like playing with the Macintosh computer and not the kid, right? Which is totally bogus. And as an adult, it just embarrasses me to think back about that, but I was so enthralled with this thing that I couldn't have.
Totally.
I remember there was this time, I think you might have been there, I can't remember. We went to the country club with one of those kids, and I didn't know what to expect. I'm serious. Like, we're going to be like butlers walking around. Like, I had no idea.
That's where all the hot chicks were, man.
They were. I had no idea what I was going to walk into. And of course, it was much more low key than that. But still, it was like, oh, we're going to the country club. Like, what's this going to be? Oh, we'll just play on those swings instead of these swings. Yeah, it's definitely fancier than an electric can opener.
Boats with motors. Yeah.
It wasn't exactly Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Not in Cooperstown, at least.
No, I mean, well, there was some serious money. But actually, there was one kid whose house we went to who had serious money.
Yeah.
And I remember being impressed by a lot of things there. Yeah. Not that I'm somebody who, worships material goods or anything like that. But man, when you're a kid, it can't help but like kind of impress you, right? It's a thing. My parents were busting their humps always for us. I mean, my dad worked holidays a lot because he could get paid double time,
right?
Effectively. And he would volunteer to work during ice storms. And my mom was always doing stuff, whether for, civic groups or, help supporting us in our activities.
Yeah.
Like they never stopped.
Well, and when they don't have money, they give of their time, right?
They do. And they did, both of them.
That's totally how my parents were in the community. The same way yours were.
They made sure we were taken care of, irrespective of the finances.
Yes.
And I'm very appreciative of that. It's definitely informed who I try to be as an adult and I try to be a responsible parent.
One of the things I feel like they taught me to do that I feel like is part of the ethos of my business and how I approach things is they taught me how to get all I could out of everything I had. My mother and leftovers, well, she could wring so many meals out of like one chicken. It was incredible. And it's, that skill is totally lost on me when it comes to cooking. But when it comes to the business, that's like, I think of that as a superpower of mine. Like I can find a million ways to dice something up so that it, feeds back into the finances of the home. And I think there's so much value to that hustle and I completely respect it. The hard part that I have is we didn't really talk about money. There was a lot of negative feelings associated with money in our house. It was something we were always battling. And I never, ever wanted to bring that into my own life. That was something that I feel like I learned. And I felt like I had to teach it to myself because the lessons weren't coming from mom and dad, even though all of those things are true. And that's a hard thing to kind of hold in the same place for me, because they gave me so much, yet the thing obviously they can't give you the thing they lack, and they didn't get it from their parents. I mean, nobody talked about money. My parents' generation, their parents, nobody was talking about money. When my grandparents died, not. My parents were shocked at how much money they were sitting on. They're like, what? Like, they were so miserly. And I think that's that depression mindset. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen next. And it'll be interesting to talk, in the context of this, and this sort of scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset. And I mean, I definitely carried that scarcity mindset when I started my business. This is what I got, man. I'm not going back to work for somebody else. So I got to keep this safe. And I get that mentality. But things completely changed when I let go of it. So it'll be interesting to talk about that.
It's funny the things we fixate on as kids, though, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. This was a stigma for me. I lived in an apartment. I didn't want to tell anyone I lived in an apartment because all my friends had houses. I mean, you guys even had a house. I certainly wasn't going to say that was a subsidized apartment. Like, we weren't paying the whole rent on that because we couldn't afford it. And the rent was $200 a month for that. I mean, I don't know if you remember that house. It was a giant house.
I liked your place for what it's worth. 13-year-old me liked your house and liked hanging out there. You had a cool basement, and I don't know. I had a bigger yard than you, but so.
Now, I had 3 jobs when I was in college.
Wow.
I was working work study, and then I had 2 outside jobs, one for graphic design, and I was working for a cabinet maker, like doing drawings for the guy. I really felt that financial responsibility. I remember going into the bursar's office with my father, and you got to pay the bill before you can start taking classes. And I saw that bill. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. That's what we're paying. And I mean, that hit me pretty hard. And it made me, number one, appreciate the classes that I was taking and the actual cost. Like, I don't know about you, but I did the math on what every class costs. So if I skipped the class,
I don't dare do that math. I should have.
Yeah.
That would have been smart. That would have helped me a lot.
Like, skipping a class is like $331. I couldn't imagine what that would mean. So I just didn't skip classes, and it helped, I guess, focus the effort, and also made, having a couple of jobs really made me realize, I got to contribute to this in a way that I hadn't really thought about prior to that. So I don't know, maybe they didn't do such a bad job educating me financially.
I don't think they did. Some of the most impactful education you get growing up is the stuff that's not deliberately education, right?
Yeah, true.
So you clearly picked up a lot of important lessons by watching their example, or by, just other attributes that became who you are as a result of your exposure, right?
Yeah.
Knowing your parents, they're pretty thoughtful people. I have to imagine that you picked up an awful lot of good things from them.
And likewise, I mean, I see, how hard your parents worked. Like, I don't, your parents didn't really I remember your dad having like a Sunday off. Like, that would be the day that your dad would be all chipper and like wanting to make breakfast if I slept over at your house, like that was his kind of happy day. Every other day was like work. And I don't know what time he went to work, but I mean, he worked for the phone company, so it was like pretty early, right? I mean,
yeah, it was always early. My parents parents both worked very hard and have both recently retired. Okay. Just in the last couple of years. So it's actually a very interesting juxtaposition of my own journey and talking to my mom and talking to my dad about their own status. Yeah, it's bizarre in some respects. Admittedly, I feel weird talking in that way, and I probably haven't used those words with them.
So you haven't said you retired?
No, I mean, well, now you're hitting on an interesting topic, right? And even when I write about this, sometimes I waffle between using the word, not using the word, putting it in quotes. Yeah. I often just talk about leaving my career, leaving the workplace. And I think I choose that language usually with them.
Yeah.
They are 2 of the very few people who I told, sooner than a few months at most before I left the workplace that I was going to do that. You're one of the others. There's a very short list of people. But even that group of people, I don't typically use that word. And I guess some of that is just what we just talked about, right? The awkwardness of it in some respects. Some of it is it sounds too definitive. And as a scientist, I feel like if we're defining something, we better be explicit. And I'm not necessarily done doing things, right?
Yeah.
I
There's a lot wrapped up in that.
There's a lot wrapped up in that. Yeah. You're much more recently on the path to fire. You found out about it a couple of years ago, been cranking on it ever since. But starting from the beginning of your career, what did saving look like for you versus spending, and how did you approach that?
Yeah.
And how did it change since then?
Yeah, it was always, I mean, I was excited to start saving in retirement because that felt like the only access that I had to like the stock market. I was completely excited about that. I mean, this goes back to that education coming from my parents was non-existent. My parents never had a brokerage account. They didn't invest in things. I mean, they had very modest retirement accounts when they retired a couple of years ago, so it wasn't, that never even came up in the discussion. So when I learned about this and the office had the little sort of convo and they're like, okay, come on in, you should all be contributing 10%, right. And 10% of $24,000 is not a lot of money, obviously. I didn't take advantage of Roth contributions. All the stuff I know about today, yeah, I committed all the sins from about the age of 22 to the age of, probably 40 is my guess.
I did much the same in many respects. So
let's say I got $2,400 in my first year there, right? The stuff they were peddling to us was all front-loaded mutual funds.
Of course.
It was all 5.75% right up front because you want the Class A shares, like all the garbage that they throw at somebody who doesn't know anything. I bought it all. And then as a consequence, as I look at that account 10 years later, I mean, those are our highest earning potential years, right? A dollar's worth $88 when you start saving it when you're 20. By the time
one of my favorite things I took from the Money Show is that $1 is 88.
Yeah, I mean,
that's huge.
That's huge math. And it's completely eroded when you have massive fees like that. And so I had no idea. I look at that account, 10 years in, and I'm like, well, man, no wonder why they put retirement so far away, like 65, because it's going to be a long time before this amounts to anything. And so I think that probably colored my savings life in a way that I was like, I mean, I'm young. I want to have fun. I want to travel. I want to do all these things. I want to buy things because, when you start earning, you have all this cash lying around. You might as well buy things. I mean, I remember when I lived in kind of suburbia, I lived outside Hartford, Connecticut for a while. And I remember the thing to do on the weekend was like go to the mall and buy things, like go buy music and buy clothes and buy a mountain bike. And, those things are fine. But when you're literally just spending everything you're earning, it amounts to nothing. I mean, I can't tell you, there's maybe one purchase I bought. I think the mountain bike that I bought when I lived in Connecticut, which I still have today, awesome bike, like $939, the most I'd ever probably paid for something in my professional life. And, but everything else just poof, just gone, And so when I started the business here in 2013, that's when I had this kind of financial awakening where I was like, oh, you have to know your numbers. You have to figure out your taxes. You have to save a runway. You're paying vendors and you're getting paid. So there's all this kind of financial machinery around that you're forced to figure it out. And if you want to have a successful business, you better tax optimize your purchases and your expenses and know how the fiscal year operates. And,
that's right.
All of those things become really important. And then, when you introduced the concept of fire to me, again, it was like this, wow. I could have been doing this when I was 22 and it would have been so different. Life would have been so different. And instead I took all that money and just threw it out the window. So I feel like a complete failure when it comes to looking back on my financial life. And, because the business is where it is today and it's earning a good amount, I can completely change that picture. But, had I had this information and these tools earlier, I would have been in a much different place. I feel like you were kind of more woke to the idea of like saving and the value there. And I feel like you were more spendthrifty than I was.
Maybe is my first answer, but But let's dial it back into the things you said. First of all, not a failure because you were never in abject debt, right? And I have had a number of people in my life who have gotten themselves into money trouble and needed help because of just poor management of finances and, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And so many people, if not most, have a poorer financial education and mindset than you do. So, I mean, give yourself a little credit. I think what you mean is from a relative sense.
Yeah. That's
you could
exactly
have been so much farther ahead, but so could have I.
Yeah.
Maybe there were things I was aware of sooner or did something about sooner. But still, I'm equally able to look back and be like, I could be doing having the same net worth that, maybe not Graham Stephan, but, plenty of these young people younger than us who are in crazy places financially because they took some simple steps early, right? I got to tell you, though, if I had heard that podcast about like $1 saved, invested at 20 is 88 at 65, I would have been a lot more all in. I don't think I would have gone lean fire, but I would have been a lot closer to that more scarce lifestyle.
Not to interrupt, but I wonder about that because the mindset of a 22-year-old, unless you're, I don't know, it's really hard to second guess the mentality that you have at that point. But man, spending in the moment was pretty important at that age. Come on.
I used to have the typical buying stuff on credit, paying off this statement balance, but you're still rolling forward those purchases that hit after the balance. You're not paying interest. But I definitely used to spend more than I should, especially earlier on, once it felt like I was making more money finally. Not a lot, but more than the pittance it felt like I started with.
Yeah.
It's also true that I figured out pretty early. So after a few years of working, that I wanted to retire early. And it is how I referred to it then.
Why is that?
I just knew that. Well, I was working very hard, and I've done a few three different startups.
So you hated your job?
No.
Come on.
Not true at all.